My name is Jason Lindstrom, and I am the CEO over at Bucketless Rewards. And I am super excited to have Robert presenting here today. We have a whole new theme going into 2022 where we're trying to source just some outstanding experts. I've had the chance to chat with Robert. He's an amazing guy. And I've also had a chance to listen to some of his books. They're phenomenal content. With all that in mind, I know Robert's going to cover a bunch of material today, but as always, questions are kind of the backbone of a really great presentation. So what I'd ask you to do, if as soon as a question pops up, even if you have one right now, make use of that QA window. You can add your question into the QA window, and there's even an option to upvote or downvote questions. So yeah, it'll be a great opportunity to answer those at the end. And with that, I think I can kick things off and introduce the man himself. Robert is the founder and CEO of Acceleration Partners, a global partner marketing agency, and the recipient of numerous industry awards on company culture. He's also, they're also an award winner from Glassdoor's Employee Choice Awards for 2 years in a row. He's the author of the inspirational newsletter Friday Forward, which is awesome. I'm a subscriber to that. It's fantastic content. And the #1 Wall Street Journal. Robert's also the author of 4 international best-selling books, including Elevate, Friday Forward, How to Thrive in the Virtual Workplace, and Performance Partnerships. And I've had a chance to listen to some of his books, and they're fantastic. He's a sought-after speaker, and that's why we're so excited to have him here today. And Robert, I think I'll turn it over to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jason. Good to be here. Hope everyone is staying warm and safe. So we did it, right? We survived 2020 and then even 2021. A lot of companies out there transitioned to remote work with no preparation, no experience, and under pretty stressful and non-ideal conditions. And for a lot of companies' employees, I actually think it went better than they expected. But the real question now, I think for businesses and business leaders is like, what comes next? How does remote or hybrid work figure into the future at their organization? And, we'll talk about a lot of different models. I think businesses can choose from a few different options. But I think the one thing that's not going to happen is we're not going back to 2019. Many of the changes and trends that we're seeing, I think, were already underway. The pandemic just advanced them 5 to 10 years. And I think companies need to decide how remote work is going to fit into their workplaces. I can tell you from our experience that remote work is highly effective, particularly in non-pandemic times. I think that's one of the things that we overlook. I actually can't think of a worse time to work remotely than the last 2 years, when a lot of the options that you were afforded from your flexibility were taken off the table, and you had to be locked into your house at certain times, and still ongoing depending on where you are. So I've seen a lot of comments and CEOs coming out in the last few months making comments about remote work. You've got David Solomon saying it's not a new normal, it's an aberration we're going to correct as soon as possible. You got Reed Hastings saying, I don't see any positives. And then in the disingenuous comment of the year, maybe decade, those who are least engaged are very comfortable working from home, says the CEO of WeWork, the guy whose business model is based on people coming back to the office. So what do these gentlemen all have in common? Well, in addition to being older gentlemen, they also have companies that have probably millions of dollars of long-term office leases. So there's probably a little cognitive dissonance going on here. And these comments actually remind me of CEOs back in 1998 who bragged that they didn't even know how to use their old email, and that was something their secretary did. Most of those folks were gone in a few years, as that really became a disqualifier to run your business if you didn't know how to use email or the internet. And really what this highlights, I think, is the danger of sunk costs and the sunk cost fallacy. I think the best decision that any business can make is always about looking forward, not backwards. And I'm not an economics professor, but I do love this phrase that Mark Cuban has been using a lot with respect to cryptocurrency, where he says, supply and demand are undefeated. And I think that's true. If there are a large number of employees who want to work remotely, and a large number of companies that are allow them to do so, they're going to find each other. And I think companies, have to ask themselves, whether they're willing to lose top talent by forcing people to return to the office full time, even after demonstrating and showing that work could get done successfully outside of the office walls. So when I was actually writing the book, How to Thrive in the Virtual Workplace that Jason talked about, I surveyed 2,000 of my subscribers who worked remotely in 2020. And I think important to point out that half these people fully in office pre-pandemic. 68% want to continue working remotely either most or all of the time. And only 2% wanted to return to work full-time in person. And look, I think this is the reality, right? A vast majority of employees don't want to return to the office full-time. I'm not advocating offices are going to disappear, and we'll talk about that. But employees value the flexibility that remote work offers, and they feel like they've proven that they can excel working from home. So I'm not prone to hyperbole, but I truly believe this is the biggest decision that companies have made holistically about their business or work environment and practices since that decision in 2020 to kind of go digital or ignore this little internet fad thing. And we kind of know how that ended up based on which side of the equation they took. I think how businesses make their decision and manage it is going to impact their business for years to come. I thought I'd touch quickly on sort of our journey to be a fully remote company, which sort of, I would say, started in earnest in 2007. We honestly were just trying to solve a pain point. We were winning top brands. We're in this space called affiliate marketing, and it's kind of a niche segment. And about 2011, we had people kind of around Boston, and we had about 7 people, $1 million in revenue. And we help pretty big companies do these programs, and the talent was just spread out all over the country. And we need to hire senior talent for these programs. So we just went and got the talent where it was, and we thought it was something we would grow out of. We actually hadn't planned on building a remote company, but we liked this culture that we built that was around sort of flexibility and accountability hand in hand. And we had a vision for remote culture that maybe could not only nationally, but globally with hundreds of employees. And we began to lean into it and to double down. And 10 years since we made that decision, we've grown our revenue almost 3,000%. We've now almost, to keep updating the slide, almost 300 employees globally in 10 countries. But more importantly, we've won 25 Best Places to Work awards, competing against companies with full in-person ping pong tables, baristas, whole thing. Obviously it's not about the perks in the office. I think actually a lot of times, I'm sure Jason would agree with this, those are used to hide a not great culture and designed to get you to never leave the office. My favorite one was worded America's Small Giants. We were awarded one of the best small companies in America. And it said, apparently Acceleration Partners is a really great place to work, even though they don't have one. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the playbook, which has definitely been updated from, taking our decade of experience and updating it with what we've learned in the last 2 years, and kind of across a couple areas. What remote employees need, keys to remote leadership, and then I think particularly for this audience, thinking about the go forward strategy. So what do remote employees need? I think they need a couple core things. The first is they need the right workplace. They need the right daily structures and tactics to be productive in their work. And then, and then honestly, they need like strong work-life integration to make sure that they don't burn out, because I think a lot of people have difficulty drawing lines. And look, it starts with the simple, getting set up to do productive remote work. I mean, we all got sent home and just had to do it. Some of us were working in our kitchens with kids running around and cats, jumping on the computers. Like, that was cool and cute for a couple months. I think we're moving back to the expectation of a little more of a professional, environment, particularly if you're pitching $1 million account or something like that. I mean, sometimes that's as simple as good equipment, having a second monitor, having a comfortable chair, standing desk, a headset. really important to have designated, physically separated workspace. I believe in the sort of Clark Kent Superman. The most productive people I know remote work, actually they get changed or do something to like switch their identity from I'm in my workspace to I'm not in my workspace, or it bleeds. Last week, I actually took something down to the kitchen. I started eating. I was working on it. My wife saw me there. She started asking me all these questions, and I had to be like, "No, no, I'm at work." Right. So it just starts blurring the lines for people when you don't create them, and that takes some company investment. Look, one of the best things that I have bought, during COVID is, just some simple light, a $60 camera, on my computer, just to have a better lens, a microphone with a $10 Amazon stand. And while I'm a big fan of virtual backgrounds, it's distracting when people's hands disappear and their heads disappear if I was presenting to you now. This looks like a cabin, but it is a green screen that, blocks it from my wife's desk behind. And I bought this pop-up green screen on Amazon for $150, and it's probably the single best investment I've made during COVID. And look, this requires some money. And I think so if you're saving money, and you could have what we operate on is a sort of a fund, so there are certain things that are approved and people decide what works best for them. I also kind of always health insurers understand this. I like the copay model, which is even if it's 10% or something like that, make sure people aren't just spending money because it's there, but it's something that they actually want and are going to use. And then, once you have the right setup, I think time and energy management are really key. I wouldn't leave your day to chance working from home. I think you need to kind of lay it out, get up at a certain time, have that break. So I think clear starts at the beginning and end of the day. We're missing these commutes, actually, these buffers between work and home, like take the dog for a walk, do something at 5:30. I realized when I would come off a Zoom call at 6 o'clock and go to 3 kids yelling at the kitchen table that I just was not compressed. And while I didn't want to be stuck in traffic, I needed that transition. So I really focus on those transition periods. And then planning out your day, right? I actually had an hour and a half webinar this morning. I'm doing this, with this audience. And so I know that I'm going to be kind of tired and my voice will be tired, after this one. And so I've planned the day accordingly and some rest and looked at what I have. So I don't have these cycles of, way too much or way too little. And practicing self-care, knowing when you need to rest, knowing those bright lines, really hard to manage them at home. And then also minimizing distractions. I think the example before of walking into the kitchen and then everyone's asking me for help because I work there. And also our technology, we get a lot of Slacks, a lot of pings. Like, it's okay to not answer that stuff. You may even want to sync up your schedules so people on your team have what I call get stuff done time, where this is our time to work and produce and we're not emailing and we all do it at the same time. Then we're kind of not bothering anyone. I used to call it airplane time, which is pretend I'm on an airplane and you can't email me and you can't call me and life goes on, right? Somehow, no one's ever tried to pull the airplane out of the sky. Well, we need to try to, protect our work hours like that. So that's the employee side. But particularly for this audience, I think a key part of the focus is on the remote leadership side, and there are similar some core tenets. I think obviously we have to hire and onboard the right people for our version of our workplace. Running effective meetings, which is a huge burden for companies, and then a shift to managing to outcomes. So not everyone excels working remotely, and not everyone will excel in your business's version of remote. I think it's really important to have a hiring system that you design. Jeff Smart wrote this book, Who. I think it's one of the best books around on building a hiring system. But this is what you're looking for: people who are aligned with your culture, people who are going to be successful at remote work. And that could be based on they've done it previously or certain attributes, like they value flexibility. They there's things outside of work they want to do. In fact, the remote work environment, I think, can work for almost everyone, except what I say is the social butterfly, like the super extreme extrovert who just wants to be around people all day long and gets their energy from them. To them, working from home wouldn't be in the top 20 list of benefits. So that's a really hard position to be put in. And then one thing that I have always believed is that I have thought since we were even smaller that we have had a world-class onboarding and training program, because we had to. Most companies don't. Most companies get away with Jason comes to work today. I go, oh, Jason, you're starting today. It's like my first job. They had no idea I was starting that day. Why don't you go shadow Jennifer? And well, that's great. That's not a training program. If you ever worked at a company with a world-class training program, you don't hit your desk until week 3. You're sent off to customer service. You go into this training, like it's all scheduled out for you. We've always done this because we can't have people start work and just staring at a blank computer. It's a terrible way to do it. So their entire first 2 to 3 weeks are scripted out for them when they're doing live training, when they're doing shadowing, when they have self-guided stuff to do. And all along the way, people are reaching out, connecting with them. Most people have said it's the best onboarding that they've ever had. And I think if you're hybrid, if you're remote, you need to, like, we have a full-time person that works on this, because this is one of the most important things that you do. Again, when people are starting at their desk, and the data shows that what starts well tends to go well and end better. And if someone has a really poor starting experience, it usually doesn't go well. The next phase is to sort of look at, like, particular meetings. Some companies just have meeting cultures. I actually believe that, much like when you're moving out of a house, there tends to be a debate between 2 partners. Like, if a meeting is not providing much value in the office, we use the traction system, and the traction in EOS has this notion of this level 10 meeting. It's called a level 10 meeting because if people aren't rating it a 9 or a 10 at the end, and they're rating a 5 or 6, like, why are you having the meeting? So, like, think about the things that you don't need anymore and throw them out. If you've had a useless meeting, don't just move it to virtual. Get rid of it. Maybe there's something that could be done in a different way. Little video updates, written updates, rethink it. The other thing is data's coming out on this, is that, you're gonna have people tire out at a couple hours of Zoom a day. It's just, it's exhausting. It's different from in person. And so I would assume that you should take any in-person meeting and figure out how to cut it in half, right? Turn an hour meeting into a 30-minute meeting, 30 minutes into 15, because where you can have a day with 5 or 6 hours of meetings in the office, I don't recommend it. Someone who's doing that on Zoom will be absolutely toast by the end of those meetings. Best way to cut meetings, and Jason and I were both in EO, and I was president of my EO chapter. First thing I ever did in any organization, nonprofit I'm in, is I eliminate update meetings. I hate update meetings. Maybe it's my ADD, but a meeting is supposed to be a dialogue and a discussion. It's not supposed to be people reading things that I could have read, for myself. So if you want to find a way to cut the meetings, we took the memo system that Jeff Bezos does at Amazon, where if you're going to have a meeting, you write up all the pertinent information in advance. People are expected to read it going into the meeting, and then you have a dialogue. So when we're catching up and updating all of our senior leaders on our board meeting, there'll be a 3-page memo that they go into. Then people process information in different ways. They come in and ask it. Every board I'm on, particularly with finance, I've gotten ruthless about this. You can send me your financial updates and I can read them. I don't need to listen to you read off spreadsheet numbers for 45 minutes. What we should do is discuss the thing about the finance that's really good or really bad, and talk about how we're going to fix that. So if you're seeing a lot of update meetings in your organizations, get this information out to people in advance, have them come to the meeting prepared. You'll cut the meeting time in half, and that's really valuable time. The other tool that I leaned into during COVID is asynchronous video. So I hadn't really used it as much. There were a lot of things going on in March, April 2020 that needed a lot of updating. We had people all around the world. I didn't want to keep having all company calls, but I felt like these were kind of sobering messages or things I needed to deliver, and people need to see, my facial expressions and see the genuine concern or empathy behind them. So I would just turn on the camera and I would record it, and I would send it out to the whole company, and they could watch it at their convenience. And I found it a great way to communicate. And even since then, actually, I know some people use some of these things for sales or marketing, but someone on my team sent me an issue, and it was a super complicated issue. And I was like, oh, it's going to take me an hour to respond. I got to document all this out. And then I'm a really slow editor. And instead I just turned on my camera and I was like, hey, Sarah, I know this has really been a heated issue, but here's why I think we need to do this. And I think if we don't do this, we're really going to regret it. And it was like a 5-minute video. And I got an email back saying, all good, we're on the same page. And I just saw a couple of people move their sort of monthly update emails to kind of quick 30 or 60 second videos. There's no 30 or 60 minute videos, 30 or 60 second videos. And again, context is helpful. I can't see any of you, but you can see me. Hopefully I look like a nice guy. I'm smiling, right? I think some of these messages, whether they're super positive or they're concern or they're sobering, like, it can get lost in an email. It's helpful to see the emotion that goes along with a presentation. This is the number one issue that I think everyone is struggling with switching to in remote management, and that is managing outcomes, not inputs. Some people have gotten super comfortable at managing inputs, right? And an input is, how much time was Sally in the office? How many calls did Brad make? And these aren't really the best ways to manage people. I'll give you all a choice between two people that can come work in your sales organization. The funny thing is, we understand this in sales. We don't understand it in other parts of the organization. If I offer you a salesperson A who works 60 hours a week, makes 200 calls and sells $500,000, or I offer you salesperson B who works 30 hours a week, 100 calls and $1 million a year, you would take salesperson B every day of the week and twice on Sunday. We understand it's about the outcomes and not the inputs. Now, if they were struggling, I might dive in and say, well, how many calls are you making and how much time are you putting into? But at the high level, if you set clear metrics for your team, they hit those marks, you make those metrics public, you have dashboards, you don't have to worry about how many hours or when they're doing their work. You're managing towards the outcomes that your organization needs. And as I said, a lot of the way we do this, we make it public. We use a tool that has all the goals. They're tied to the 1-year goals or tied to the quarterly goals. There's green, there's red, there's yellow, there's people's names next to it. We set really public accountability so everyone knows what it is that they're doing and what they're responsible for. And look, this is another kind of management 101, but in needed even more. You got to delegate more. And I think delegation is critical in management, but even more so in remote. You can't hover over employees while they're working, so you need to trust them. And what I encourage a lot of our new managers to do, because we have a lot of them, and let's face it, new managers often aren't the best managers. They're learning how to move from a contributor to a manager. And that's to follow the 85% rule. It's never going to be 100% how you want it. And I think successful delegation is when it's 85% of the way you wanted it, without you being involved. And if you can and change your lens for that to be a win, and then you can always like coach around the 15% next time, but rather than getting upset about it, you're like, oh, that's 85% how I would want it. Like, that's great. Trust me, no one does anything 100% how I would want it. And to be fair, and I'm sure a lot of you feel the same, and to be fair, if I would kind of cramp their individuality and I would probably restrict their freedom a little bit if that was my threshold. So I think this concept is super important. Trust, but verify. So remote work is really dependent on trust. I was on an onboarding call with someone on my team this morning. I asked people when they joined to sort of share some stories. Past boss, one reason she left the last organization, her boss made her be on Zoom all day long. And which was exhausting and from a place of distrust. So people will do better work when you know that you trust them. I think you got to give trust first and then have high standards. So trust people until you not give them a reason not to. A lot of people use the 2 out of 100, the exception, not the rule. If 2 people broke your trust and 98% didn't, you should treat everyone like the 98%, not the 2%, right? Wouldn't that make kind of a lot more sense? And with that, though, I really think it's important to trust but verify. Look, if the sales aren't there, dig in. Are the calls being made? If something seems out of whack, then you should dig in. This is why the world has auditors, right? Sometimes what we're told is not exactly what it is. So there's always the right to audit it. But I like this notion of setting trust. We actually had someone on our team, who lost their childcare years ago, was not honest about it, and their work really suffered. And when someone dug in, they found out, and we're very clear about, you can't, this is not a job where you can work while you have your kids, are taking care of your kids. It's not that sort of role. You can have flexibility, but not at the same time. And, the trust was so broken with the team that she had done that she actually ended up leaving on her own. And again, I think that's the standard you want, which is like, look, we gave trust here. We gave all the chances here. And so, you are the benefit of that, but also once you cross that, it's very hard to get back. And that falls into this notion of availability and accountability. I think you need to set expectations for your colleagues, managers, and direct reports for when you're available and when you're not. We follow the what I say are sort of in-office standards. So if you're grabbing lunch, if you're getting a coffee break, something like that, going to the restroom, like you don't need to tell anyone about that. And we're a flexible culture, but if you're going to disappear for a couple hours during work hours, like you need to tell someone that. Say you're going to the baseball game, you're going to picking up your dad, you're going to do whatever. But it's just more respect to tell people you're not going to be there so people aren't looking for you. There's nothing that erodes trust faster than people that can't be found during normal work hours. Like that is something I've seen pretty consistently in our experience. So again, we always say flexibility comes with accountability. Just be accountable. Tell us we don't want to bother you if you're not going to be there. But if there's a crisis and we're looking for you and we just can't find you, it's not a good look. A lot of people also ask me, hey, what spy technology do you use to keep track of your employees? And I say, don't use any spy technology. Now, I know some people are in financial services or banking or regulated industries. But again, back to that slide from before, inputs are far less important than outcomes. If you set the correct outcomes, manage those outcomes, you don't need to spy on people to know they're getting work done. I've seen a lot of companies trying to sell these software packages under, employees like them. They don't like them. And it's an entire burden to have managers go through logs. And you know what the number one thing that most of these programs are doing? They're tracking just movement or activity on the computer. They're tracking like mouse movement and whether someone's just being active, which is the ultimate input message. By the way, you can go on Amazon. One of the fastest growing sellers on Amazon is a mouse mover that you plug in and it moves your mouse all day. So I would argue that if you're using spy software, if your employees are using mouse movers, you have lost whatever battle you are started, before it's even started, and you probably don't have a very good culture at your company. Apologies to those who are operating in that way. So we've talked about some of the tactics, but look, this is where I think leadership needs to plant its flag. Sorry, it's American. I could have done a hybrid one for this. Like you need to be clear about the go forward strategy. Like I know we've got these variants coming up and it's whatever, but some companies are still hiding behind that in terms of declaring what it is they're going back to. So there's a couple different choices, right? There's back to the office. I think the investment banks, to their credit, well, I'm not sure it's the right strategy. They've been super clear, come back by X date or lose your job. So at least they're being clear and those employees can make decisions. Then there's the ditching the office crowd. We're going 100% remote and that's pretty straightforward too. But I think the bucket we're going to see the most of is hybrid workspaces. And frankly, this one actually worries me the most. I think it's really important that hybrid needs to be a strategy, not the absence of a strategy. And I see a lot of companies going hybrid as sort of the absence of a strategy and trying to please everyone. And when you do that, you end up normally upsetting everyone rather than pleasing everyone because of ambiguity. I've also seen a lot of companies come out and say, hey, you can work from absolutely anywhere, particularly in hybrid companies. I am not a lawyer and you cannot use any of this as legal advice, but let me tell you, there are some massive headaches of telling people that they can work from anywhere. So there are state and county employment laws where if you just have one person, in that area, you need to register in that state or county and pay taxes. There are some costs in terms of getting those regions open. There's healthcare and benefit parity. Like if you have a health plan that's not covered in another area and you have to pay out of pocket to get something, in the States, like healthcare is by state. It's not national in any way. Again, in the US, we have this thing called sales tax nexus. One employee in a state can require you to collect sales tax for that entire state. You have issues of IP ownership. I heard a story where someone was working like as a full-time independent contractor for a company out of Canada. I think it was a US company. They were in Canada. I think they moved to France. France has very different IP laws around contractors who aren't employees because they want employment. And they basically didn't own any of the stuff that the contractor developed and had to pay $250,000 to buy it back from them. And one of the things I was on a podcast with a guy who runs an all virtual company. He's all around the world, and he was kind of bragging that the way they do. So I was always curious. The way they do it is we have everyone set up as independent contractors in all these areas. And afterwards, I said to him, just so you know, that's completely legal in all half the areas you just said. Just the thing is that no one's been looking for the last decade. Now there's a massive focus on where companies are, where people are. We've just printed money for years. People want the tax revenue. So just because you've been doing it for 10 years and you were probably breaking the law, it's not a good reason. And the states really need the money, as I said, and they're coming after it. And so there are a couple of solutions that address some of these. One is, I think, figure it out in advance. We tell people very clearly where they can work, where they cannot work, where are approved things, and I'll talk about that. Again, this goes to hybrid. Be crystal clear about what people can do and not do. Upfront is much more important than cleaning this stuff up after. And then leverage PEOs in the US or employers of records otherwise. These are organizations that set up entities all over the world, and they can actually legally employ, co-employ with you. And while there's a high premium per employee, it's a great way to get set up with 2 or 3 people in a company without having to spend tens of thousands of dollars and opening an entity. Globalization Partners is a great example of one that's growing like crazy and lets you hire people in 150 companies. And again, you may be tempted to ignore this or this problem down the road, but let me just tell you when it matters. This stuff always comes up in due diligence. And that's when, either an investor or a PE, where you're going to put money in your company and you realize you have a massive liability, or you're selling your company, you're having an IPO. There's a story in my book about a company that was going to go public, and all the developers were paid as independent contractors, and they held them hostage and extracted stock from them in order to be able to go public. So if you're thinking at all about selling your business, there are due diligence consultants that HR that are paid to go through this. And again, if you have illegal employees in these states and countries, it's going to be really expensive and a mess to get out of it. So some of the questions I think that leaders should ask or be able to answer in a hybrid workplace is, how far from the office can people live? When are they expected to be in the office? Is it 9 to 5? Is it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Is it 50% of the time? Is it for certain tasks? Can it be on short notice if you live 2 hours away? How are meetings handled? I've heard some really smart CEOs say that, when we do Zoom meetings and some people are in the office and not, we're all going to do it on our individual computer. So it's not like us and them and a bunch of people in a room and then someone kind of up in the corner. How are you going to level the playing field in terms of, reviews and FaceTime? And then again, blue, white collar divisions. There are some companies where certain roles require to be in the office, but the manager's role doesn't have to be in the office. But if that's your whole team, you probably don't want to work from home all the time when they're in the office. So, these things are even different by potentially division and region within a company. It's not that there's a right or a wrong answer. I just think you should have an answer for as many of these questions as possible if you're declaring remote work. Our secret sauce for this, I generally don't recommend copying the U.S. airline, industry as a business model, but what we call the hub model. So we hire people in sort of collections of people in geographic locations. It's kind of an 80-20 rule. So 80% of our people are in these hubs, and these are areas with 20 or more. And they're with kind of an hour circumference of a major airport: Boston, Philadelphia, Denver, Seattle, London, Sydney. And this allows us to create in-person collaboration opportunities, team building, socialization, also really good for in-person interviewing. Also, for the type of culture we have and want to build, myself and our CEO can fly around and we'll have hub weeks. And in 2 weeks, all the hub will meet and we'll fly to all those meetings. And so we can touch the entire company. We can meet with people, 30 people at a time, 40 people at a time. If they were in 100 different places, we would never have a chance to connect with the whole company. So we have not seen this model super emulated, but it's been really successful for us. And then it also gets around some of those state issues and stuff. Again, we're saying you can work in a hub. Here are these approved hubs, and then this is what a vacation looks like versus living and working abroad. So I do think that some things are permanently changing, as I said in the beginning. The expansion of remote work is changing this pattern we've had for years. So typically you were young, you started working in a city, you got older, you had kids, you wanted some more space, you kind of migrated to the suburbs, and then you commuted back into the city where a lot of those jobs, were. There was sort of the city to suburb bridge. Well, I think that as remote work becomes more popular, I think we're going to see that bridge close. I think people that want to live and work in a city will live and work in a city, and people that want to live in a suburb are going to look for more options where they can work from that suburb most of the time. Upwork did a survey during the sort of initial phase of COVID, and 55% of people said they wanted to relocate over 2 hours away from their current location. A lot of these folks in the suburbs are your late 30s, 40, 50-year-olds, with kids who make up a lot of your middle and upper management. So if you think about, if companies aren't prepared to offer remote work to these folks, they may be caught flat-footed in a changing world of demand. So I love this notion of flying your flag. I always say, like, we are what we are. We're not for everyone. Our company, our core values are own it, embrace relationships, and excel and improve. We are a remote work first company. We are a client service organization. Not going to get around that. If you hate client service, probably won't like working at our company. And we're really fast paced. We're trying to be a leader in a digital industry that moves quickly. And we had some great reviews on Glassdoor. I think, interestingly, these are some of the negatives that people posted who left 4- and 5-star reviews. So working from home is amazing, but don't assume it's a cushy job. It's an agency, so it's fast paced. You really need to be self-motivated to work in a company that's 100% remote. This is a fast paced environment with a lot of work. Our best employees are trying to scare away people that are thinking, oh, well, it's remote, it should be easy, should be flexible. We're really trying to say to people, here's our value prop, our version of this, our version of remote work, our value proposition. And if you're fit for it, you'll love it. And if you're not, we're trying to get them to self-identify out of that, or their peers are trying to get them to self-identify out of that. So just recapping a couple of the key takeaways, I think. One, we're not going back to 2019. If you're waiting for that, you might be waiting for quite a while until someone invents time travel. I think, again, we're past the point of needing to pick a strategy and need to be supporting it. McKinsey did a study earlier last year that said that 30% of companies hadn't made a decision, and 40% of companies were so vague in their decision that employees didn't know what to make of it, and it was causing them stress. So that's 70% of the population where the employees aren't totally sure what they're going back to, but they kind of know what they want. And then, again, last but not least, I think hybrid needs to be a strategy in itself, not the absence of one. So that's what I have to share. If you're interested in the book, which Jason mentioned, I think a lot of people sign up will get it. There's also a resources page under virtual for a lot of the things that I talked about, and a deeper version of this in a course for people who are looking to do it with their team. And that's at remote.course.com. That is a wrong expiration code. We moved it. That'll work until the end of January. So I know I saw one or two in the Q&A, but I'd love to please put in your questions, and we would love to jump in and answer them.
Awesome. And I actually have a bunch of questions to start off with here. But
Yeah.
First of all, Robert, it's cool. I was taking notes as you went through that, and I have a bunch of questions and also a bunch of just awesome comments and like really good takeaways. So thank you so much for that information share. And I'll jump into the questions. And as I go through these, again, attendees, please feel free to jump in as well and just put your questions into the QA window. We'll definitely do our best to get to them. So opening question for you, Robert. You provided a number of great ideas and tips on the remote and hybrid workplace. What tip or action item do you think is most impactful? Like, where do you think what's something a lot of companies miss, but they should really be dealing with?
Yeah, I'm going to pick two. So I think the meetings, people are just, killing a lot of time and energy. So that's the biggest one, cutting them in half, getting rid of update meetings. But I think the management philosophy is this shift towards outcome-based. If you can't get by the way, if you're in an office, you should be doing outcome anyway. Like, these are all mostly foundational best practices. The quote I like hearing is this notion of, I think, when the water goes out, you see who's not wearing their bathing suit, the tide. And I think that's what this is. Like, obviously, the companies, like, a lot of these things are just foundational best practices that if you have a trusting, outcome-oriented environment, you probably had an easy shift to remote work as an organization. If you had a distrusting, input-oriented, butt-in-seat culture, it was probably a miserable transition. So I think that's part of it.
Awesome. And then, so a follow-up question. What I heard you say is meetings, cutting meetings in half, and moving to an outcomes-based culture. Outstanding. I have two follow-up questions for
Yeah.
the meeting piece specifically. You talked about rolling out the memo meeting, that concept from Amazon where you send out the memo in advance.
Yeah.
Uh, how did you roll that out, and did you get much pushback at first? Yeah, any tips on that?
No, and I think in the book I have a couple of the styles of the different memos. We didn't get any pushback because I think people don't like their time wasted, and they like, and it kind of also, for the person presenting the memo, it levels the playing field. Some people are just fast talkers, and there might be big hat and no cattle, but there's some people who are just quieter and more introspective, and I think it labels them. I think it gives them an opportunity to come in prepared and being able to think of something, or to present a case very logically and not have to, present something. They're getting judged more on their substance than on their presentation style.
Awesome. Yeah, that was in fact the memo meetings was one of my favorite takeaways from the book. And related to that, when you talked about building outcome-based cultures, I think in the book you referenced every job description has clear KPIs identified for 6 months and 12 months.
Yeah.
And there's 5 core job duties. So like right from the outset, there's total transparency as to what's expected from people.
Yeah, they're gonna, like, that's their performance review. Like, again, they're coming in, you say, someone once told me that it should be like, this is what good looks like, right? And you're saying to them, in 6 months, if I had to pay you all of the money or none of the money, what are the things that I need to have done? And so it gets you to be really clear, like, in terms of, hey, $1 million pipeline, like it's that's what we're going for, right? So and that's good, and that's success. And I think that's what a lot of companies are missing. They get it in sales, but they haven't figured out, in their other positions, what is the right outcome they are seeking rather than the input that they are seeking.
Outstanding. That's great. And I've seen a ton of questions are now pouring in, so thank you, everybody. I'm going to jump into a couple of here.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on a company defining what hybrid means? For example, should a company define hybrid as you must be in the office 3 days a week? What are some best practices a company should follow if they choose to define hybrid? And that question.
This is a trick question, because I don't think there is a right or wrong. I think that you just have to decide and be clear for your company. I have heard people say, we're in on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I've heard people say, come in any 50% of the time. I've heard people say, we're only coming in for these sort of meetings and we're designing the office around collaboration space. Those are important, different distinctions. And it might mean the difference between someone saying, I like this and want to do this, or I want to go somewhere else. So a lot of this has to do with what your people want, what business is. The problem is, if you survey your people, you'll probably get a third want different things. This is where a leader, but if you do get 99% don't want to come back to the office full time and you declare full time, like, that's not a real data-driven decision. But this is where, look, leaders need to lead. Like, you make an unpopular decision, you put a flag in the ground. And I would argue that, for us, like, it's like, look, here's what we are. If you lost 30%, at least that they want, if you're not going back to the office full time and that's what they want, let them go find that somewhere else and go get the people who want your thing. But prolonging that thing and creating something that everyone doesn't like is not a better solution.
Awesome. Next question. When you mentioned basing performance on employees achieving goals versus timed work, how do you handle non-exempt employees that are paid by the hour and handle admin types of work while working remotely?
Yeah, I try not to hire people in California because that's where that practice happens a lot. They have say Hotel California, you can come, but you can never leave. Again, that's one of those states, like, you hire one person in California and you are like all in on California. So that might be a decision you want to be really thoughtful about before you do it. Look, what does a good admin look like versus an average admin? I promise you, it's not their hours worked. It's something about the production and what they get done and how they answer, or how responsive they are, or the amount of things that they're able to handle for the people that they're administering for. Like I don't know anyone that says, oh, that's a good admin because they work 40 hours and that one's a bad admin because they work 32. There's some productivity or outcome metric. And again, I think you could interview the people they work for and say, what does success look like? Like, what is it? If I were to say, like, for me, it's like, if my admin proactively deals with 95% of my calendar issues, like that's my outcome metric.
Awesome. And thank you for that example. And then a question from Lindsay. And this is a great one. So you mentioned to share key points before a meeting and then use the time together to discuss. Love it. Do you recommend this for all hands or all staff meetings?
Depends on how much time you have. If a leader's speaking for like 60 seconds, and you're just getting some color and it's Jason saying, hey guys, thanks so much for the thing, like otherwise, then I think that's fine. If you start getting into 5 or 10 minutes and there's nothing about the delivery of that data that they couldn't have processed before, then, again, this also really depends on whether this is a 10-minute stand-up meeting or an hour, strategy meeting. That would probably be my scale. The longer the meeting, the more I would try to make it discussion, never done this before, maybe the DDD acronym, discussion, dialogue, decisions, right? That's not reading information to people. I think that's the distinction. But sure, like little 5-minute, like, morning meetings or 10-minute check-in meetings, like, then probably not. Where it's more work, to do the advanced work, it's probably not worth it. When you think about taking an hour meeting for some 20 of your key executives down to a half hour, I mean, that's tens of thousands of dollars of time. We at one point wanted people to be conscious of meeting. We gave everyone in the organization a rate, and you had to put in the meeting. So if you invited $500 an hour people, you had to write the meeting value of $2,500 in the meeting to bring people's awareness to it.
That is such an awesome metric, because I think so many people undervalue other people's times, and by adding a metric, that's super powerful. Awesome. And here's kind of a good follow-up question as well from Lisa. So thank you, Lisa. When interviewing candidates, how do you differentiate between being comfortable working from home versus being successful at it?
Yeah, I think you'd have to ask some behavioral-based questions there around what did they accomplish, how were they productive, how, like, if it's and you can sound like, what is something they did better from home that they did in person. I think you could start to tease out whether they said, look, when I was in the office, I get pulled into a meeting, I get asked this, when I at home I did this and I actually got more done. So again, you're looking for two things, and there's a bunch of these in the book. Demonstrated experience where they did it, that's always the best predictor, and now there's more and more of those. We didn't have a lot of those for a while. The other is characteristics of someone who would work well from home, people who are independent, self-motivated, those things. And then there's another bucket of, like, the circumstances would say the flexibility is important to them. They are a parent of young kids, they are someone who likes to travel, they are an elite athlete who's on a program that requires running 2 hours in the middle of the day. Like, those people are really going to value flexibility and don't want to lose it, so they're going to work hard for it.
Awesome. Thanks for those examples, Robert. And then this question's from Craig. Any tips on replacing the unexpected value of impromptu water cooler chats, collisions in the virtual mode?
Yeah, look, this is the hardest one because it's both a distractor of time and a generator of gossip, and it's also really helpful to overhear stuff. So the only way we do in-person events, like we use the hub meeting to get together, have stuff. People do, there's in the resources page, there's actually a tool that sets up one-to-one coffee dates in Slack with people called Donut. And there's some stuff out there to try to replicate those moments but you can't eavesdrop, right? So that is the one thing that's hard to recreate.
Awesome. Yeah, we use Donut here, and we're big fans of it. And yeah, that's a great recommendation. Awesome. And I think we've managed to move through a good majority of these questions here. Also, in the spirit of recognition, Robert, awesome job. There's just tons of thank yous in the questions and comments area.